Hi there, and welcome to today's webinar, Extinguishing the Fires Within PLCs. My name is Kendall Hunter, and I will be moderating this session for you all today. Like most of you, my background's in education. I'm a former middle school special education teacher, reading specialist, turned marketing director for Otus. Otus is the sponsor of today's webinar. We're so happy to have you all here with us. At Otus, what we do is we support PLCs with the data and tools that they need, you all educators need, to understand where students are, plan next steps, and really align instruction. Instead of spending time organizing spreadsheets, Otus helps PLCs focus on growth through shared real-time data. As educators and school leaders, I know you all know that having the right technology is absolutely critical. This webinar, though, is about something even more foundational. We're going to talk about laying the groundwork for effective PLCs and navigating common challenges that you may already be facing. So that's why at Otus, we've tapped into our friends at First Educational Resources. If you haven't heard of First, they provide professional development to schools nationwide, really helping educators and school leaders to revitalize PLCs and connect the collaborative work that you do in those PLCs to real impact. And what I mean by that is changes that you can see reflected through student results. And that's what they'll be talking about today with you all. Before I hand it off, though, I just have a couple housekeeping items to run through so that you have the best possible experience during this 1-hour webinar. So check the audio settings on your computer as well as your speaker volume if you're having any audio trouble. If you are experiencing any difficulties, I highly suggest just doing a quick refresh. We will be here. This is being recorded, so don't worry if anything happens or you need to step away. Give it a refresh and you'll pop back in and join us right where we are. There are some other icons that open up additional features in the webinar console. Check those out as you are able. I want to make a note that there is an issue with the resource list today, so I'll be using our chat to share some resources with you all, and those resources will be made available afterwards. So we'll share things in the chat as we're able, and we'll get those resources over to you afterwards. We appreciate your understanding as we were having a little bit of a technical glitch there. But as we start our webinar today, that chat is going to be your friend. That's how you can chat with us throughout. Tell us what you're experiencing, what challenges you're having in your PLCs. In fact, as you get started here today, I'd love it if you could just say hello, tell us where you're joining us from, tell us how effective your PLCs are or what you talk about often. Feel free to just use that to kind of set the stage for why you're here and what you want to learn. We'll be watching that and just kind of using that to better understand you all who are here with us today. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so as you're typing away, telling us about your PLCs in the chat, just know that everything today will be recorded and will be shared with you after the fact. But that concludes my housekeeping items for you all. I'm really excited to introduce to you today the team from First Education. They are true PLC experts. You are in amazing hands. I'll be back later in the webinar to answer some questions. I know I talked about the chat for sharing where you're at with your PLCs or maybe some challenges you're hoping to talk about today. But feel free to tee up some questions for us. About 45 minutes in, we will take a look at those questions if we haven't answered them live and talk about them as a group. But hey there, Garth. Hey, Gabe. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Kendall. Thanks so much for the introduction and opportunity. Thank you to Otus for inviting us to be a part of this webinar and discuss what we refer to often as a lot of the fires that we see within PLC. So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. My name is Garth Larson. I'm the co-founder and CEO here at First Educational Resources. On behalf of our entire team here at First, we appreciate you spending the next 40 to 50 minutes with us, just talking a little bit about PLCs. We're here to offer some solutions. We're here to talk about some common challenges that we're often coming up against when we work with schools and work with collaborative teams. But at First Educational Resources, we have 9 different divisions that support schools in a variety of ways. And one of those divisions is our PLC Center. And it's my honor to introduce you to my colleague that's joining us for this webinar, Gabe Hackett. Gabe is our director at the PLC Center. And I think the one thing that all of you are going to learn from Gabe today as we go through this webinar is just how practical the information is that he's going to share. We are both educators at the core, working in K-12 settings. Both have been elementary principals in our careers, but now we get to go and help schools within this process. Gabe's going to be joining us, or is joining us from Minnesota today. He's celebrating a big Vikings victory last night. I'm joining from Wisconsin. We're celebrating a big Packers victory on Sunday. But the one thing that we want you to take away from this entire session is we want to give you something that will help you right now. This isn't grounded in theory. This isn't grounded in here's what it could look like. This really is grounded in perspective of things that we've seen schools do to overcome some of these challenges as so-called fires, as we have shared so far. So we're just here to offer a perspective. We're here to share some information. We hope that will help. But the one thing we want you to know at the end, we're going to share some contact information with you as well. We'd love to stay connected with you beyond today because you might have questions. You might try one of the tools that we're going to introduce you to today and might come up against some challenges within that. So we hope you'll stay connected beyond today. But Gabe, thanks so much for joining. What just maybe a little bit additional that I didn't fill in that you think would be helpful for the group to know about you and the PLC Center?
Yeah, thanks, Garth. So as Garth said, I'm the director of the PLC Center. I'm located here in Minnesota, where I was born and raised and still happy to be. But I also don't mind getting out of the Minnesota winters when I get to travel to just about anywhere else where the weather is typically better. As Garth said, we really push ourselves to make PLC solutions as practical as possible. And when we put together our webinar today, we wanted to put together a couple of tools that you could take to your buildings immediately and be able to put into place in PLCs for better outcomes. And we're always looking through the lens of impact. So being able to take a tool for some possible challenges and turn those into solutions within your PLCs. And just looking through the chat already, Garth, I see so many different comments about where PLCs are. And the truth is, even from building to building, our PLCs are in different places. So how can we use these tools to individualize the instruction just like we would in the classroom for our PLCs?
Fantastic. Well, as we put this together for you today, kind of the main goals that we have regarding extinguishing some of these fires is, first and foremost, we're going to take a little time with you, identify some of the common challenges or fires that we see within PLCs. As Gabe mentioned, we know that we have some people already, sharing some of the information in there with that temperature check that Kendall did. But then we really want to get you into utilizing and understanding, and you have access to these, a simple tool just to help you kind of establish your roles, your norms, and really kind of your vision for how your PLCs function. I know my first introduction to PLCs, we established norms, and they were kind of basic. It was, start and end on time, figure out who's going to bring the snack to the meeting, those types of things. But we really didn't have an understanding of like, what does it look like as a team if we are functioning at the highest level? Like, what would that actually look like? If anybody walked into one of those meetings, what would be observed within that? So we're going to talk, and we're going to give you a tool that will help with that conversation. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about cause-effect relationships and how the understanding cause-effect impacts the efficacy of your collaborative teams, of your PLCs, and understanding like how we recognize that when we do this scenario, this action, it makes a difference over here, and we begin to connect those actions to impact. Then we're going to give you one more simple planning tool that you can use within your PLCs, or you can take back to your schools if you're a school leader, that really helps us understand how we share practices that lead to the outcomes that we're aiming for, lead to the impact that we want to see. So that's everything that we're going to get through here within the next 40 minutes. And again, please keep those comments going in the attendee chat. We're going to be using that as we go, and we want to make sure that we just have a sense of, creating more of a community as we go. So that being said, kind of why are we here? We hope that as you're thinking about this webinar, all of you decided to join this today for some reason, or if you're watching this after the fact, there's something about it when you hear the phrase extinguishing the fires within PLCs that probably resonated with you. Something along the way probably has led you to say, yeah, we have some fires within our PLCs and we kind of want to work through it. And what we've learned is that over the years, that the phrase PLC, or the idea of collaboration or collaborative time, or a lot of school districts that we work with right now have moved away from the phrase PLC. They might call it collaborative learning teams or whatever it may be. But there's been a lot of uncertainty around this process, around like what are we actually aiming for? How do we see this time as valuable and not just another thing that's added to our plate? Because the reality is we know it's been proven over and over again through research that collaboration leads to impact. Collaboration allows us to be better on behalf of our students. You know, Gabe always shares this great Chinese proverb about if you want to go fast, if you go alone, if you want to go far, go together. And I think that's something that we know that this is supported in research and has been proven, but there is also a reality check that exists in a lot of our schools. And for those of you that are familiar with this study that came out back in, I believe, Gabe, it was 2015, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did a study called Teachers Know Best. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to look at the views of professional development within schools. So they went out and they surveyed school leaders, they went out and they surveyed teachers. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is kind of the end result of how educators were feeling about the time that goes into where we want to spend more time when it comes to professional learning and professional development. Now, the interesting piece that as you're looking at this, that kind of, I would say, when Gabe and I both saw this, kind of hit us straight in the face, is the image on the right, where you see the numbers that are more in the positive. Those are kind of local leaders, local education authorities, et cetera. Where do they want to spend more time when it comes to professional development? And as you can see, lesson observation is very high, coaching is very high, and the third highest on where time and energy from a leader lens was being spent was on that of professional learning communities. But if you look at the left side tells a very different story. If you actually take a look at it, the one thing to first and foremost understand is that there's not a lot of professional development that has been overwhelmingly positively received in terms of from educators. But there is one thing that really sticks out in terms of that particular study, that particular set of survey data, which is that professional learning communities ranked incredibly low. So the net satisfaction of how that is being done was -45 in terms of that outcome. So that leads us to kind of a question that we have to ask, which is, if we have research that indicates that there is incredible power in collaboration, yet the application is not as well received by the educators, that leads to a little bit of a challenge. And so what we want to try to work through in this particular webinar is, one, where did PLCs go wrong? And not just where did they go wrong, but what can we actually do about it? Like, what can we do to overcome some of these challenges that we see? So what we would love you to do right now is just, we kind of started this a little bit, but really give us, like, in the chat, attendee chat right now, like, what are your main fires? Just go ahead and start to list them. Like, what are the big fires that exist right now within your PLCs? Just get them out there and share with each other. It's great. I'm looking through here right now. I see where everyone is joining us from. But again, if you can just go ahead, what are the main fires? Name your PLC's fires right now in the attendee chat. And Gabe's going to kind of take a look at these and kind of go through what he's seeing in there. Gabe, you want to share what you're seeing in that attendee chat?
Yeah, so far we have avoidance, conflict within the team, different topics when you're in a small school. So we've got trying to collaborate when maybe we're singletons in that situation. Teacher capacity, lack of buy-in. Teacher buy-in has come on a couple of different times. Adult conflict is also a theme I'm seeing. Avoidance has come up a couple of different times, Garth. Okay. Conversation about student behavior instead of student learning. That's certainly something that we're seeing out in different schools and districts.
I just saw one there that it's become more of a rant time. I see that in there where yes. A very common fire or challenge that we see within our collaborative process, that it just becomes an opportunity to get adults together and just talk more about challenges and less about solutions.
Mm-hmm. Resistance to talking about data. Sometimes that can be a very vulnerable conversation.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for putting. There are plenty of fires in here yes. That we see right now. And what obviously during this one webinar, we can't get to every single one of them. But Gabe and I, just even seeing that right there, we believe that a couple things we're going to introduce you today can really help with some of those challenges that you're seeing. Now, as we go kind of through and all over the country and actually now internationally and work with schools on their PLC process, these are also some common fires that we come up against. We don't understand the purpose. Preparing for it feels like I'm preparing for a whole nother class. And I know there was something in there around, whether that is tied to buy-in or just the time associated with it. This has taken valuable time from our prep time. again, because they see it as that one more thing. The fourth one that we have on here, this is one that we commonly will hear from teachers when we're interviewing them is, when are we going to collaborate around something that matters to us the most? And that's a big piece of like understanding that time, that precious time that we have for collaboration, how do we actually get the focus of that to be something that we're going to see a direct impact in the classroom on? That's a big one. How does this work when I teach different grade levels, or as Gabe mentioned, if I'm a singleton and I'm the only one teaching this subject area, and I get put into a collaborative team or a PLC, and they'll say, okay, hey, bring data to this meeting, yet none of our data is tied around even the same subject area. How do we actually make that work? And then the last one there, how do I get along with my team? I don't get along with my team, and now you want me to collaborate with them on a daily basis or once a week or whatever it may be. So again, these are all real challenges that we hear and very much aligned with what we're seeing in the chat box. Gabe, is there anything else that was in that attendee chat that maybe kind of stuck out that isn't within this list here that you're seeing?
Yeah, so a couple of people have just said we've got new teams together, and so even to the most basic level of just starting to plan for norms, structures, and the platform that we have for PLCs. In other words, how do we do this? How do we collaborate within our PLCs?
Okay, well, good. That's going to be a great one that we can make sure that we address right away. That's going to speak to a few of the challenges that have been there. So our goal really is to help you move some of these problems or fires and begin to start to look at more of a solution-based focus or a solution-based mindset around some of this. And one of the things that we've, that people always ask is where do we start? How do we start in this process? Maybe some of you have come to the decision that, our PLCs are a mess and we just need to either reset or do a recalibration around it. Maybe you have some great things going on and you're just having little pockets of fires that exist out there or challenges that exist out there. And so a lot of times people ask, like, where do we start? So at the PLC Center, we've created kind of a process that we found is very helpful for schools and teams and school leaders to take into consideration when it comes to kind of really getting that cycle of impact going. So one of the first things that we'd always recommend that you do is just do an analysis around your current reality. Like, what is that? And we've we've scratched the surface on that today by just having you do that reality check in the chat box. But we really do recommend that you do kind of a deeper analysis of, where are your teams? Because you might have some teams that are functioning at a very high level, and you might have some teams that need a little bit more support and they're not quite where you want them to be. You might look at that high level functioning team and say, but are they really changing practice in the classroom, or are they just a really good team that gets along well? So there are some things that you want to think about in terms of that current reality. It's very common that Gabe will go in and work with schools to establish what that current reality is. We've created basically a PLC reality analysis around like kind of just knowing like where is it, even if you need an external lens on that. But really where we want to begin today is on that second area that you see on your screen right now, which is develop purpose and vision for your PLCs. That is the first thing that we have to make sure that we take into consideration is, do we as a school system, as a team, do we really have a clear understanding of our purpose for PLCs? I know when we first implemented, and I've heard Gabe say this too, we did it because the other school was doing it. We heard that, like, hey, schools are implementing collaborative time or PLCs. We should do it because we've been told it really makes a difference. But it was just kind of something that was told to us. It was kind of like, here you go, create the schedule, remove that barrier, create time for them, get them in a room and get them collaborating. But I don't think we really knew what the ultimate goal or the ultimate purpose was. Now, we could take a little bit of time on this. Again, a recommendation we make for you on this particular, as you're watching this webinar, is to make sure that you actually clearly establish a purpose statement for your PLCs. Once you have a purpose in place, then you can begin to look at what are your current practices in terms of actions, time frames, agendas, all of that. But you got to know like what you're aiming for in the first place. So for us here at the PLC Center, this is where we kind of landed in terms of a purpose statement that is something that maybe helps in your conversation. You don't have to take and adopt. This is just a perspective that we use. But we believe that the purpose for PLCs is what we refer to as observable impact. And Kendall alluded to this a little bit at the beginning of the webinar, but ultimately the impact is one of the biggest elements that we want you to think about from this today. And the way that we define observable impact is changes in practice that can be observed in the classroom, but also lead to improved student outcomes. The only way that we improve student outcomes is by changing practice. And the purpose of the PLC is to have discussions around practice so we can change the impact and outcome that we see. So this is one that you could maybe use as a starting point. If you already have a purpose statement for your PLCs, great. That's something that you can take and use and move forward with. If you haven't had that conversation, this is a really good starting point. But once we establish that purpose statement and know that kind of this is what we're aiming for, then we need to now start to say, okay, how do we begin to work through that? So in that second part of the module, we said establish a vision, or establish a purpose and establish a vision. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the visioning side of it. So a very common fire that we run up against when working with schools is my team doesn't even know how to PLC. And again, kind of know we're using PLC there, Gabe, as a verb. But ultimately, when we think about it, like, they don't know how to actually work as a team. So we're going to give you the first tool that's going to help you with this, and we're going to talk through what that looks like. But in order to do that, we want to make sure that we get into kind of this idea of establishing collective commitments and norms, which is really creating your vision. And the way we do that is through a protocol called Worst Best. So Gabe, first and foremost, can you share with the group where they can access this, these resources that you're going to be talking them through?
Absolutely. So we've created just a shared folder for all of you with the two tools that we're using today. And so so you can use that bit.ly, and we've got the link in the chat. Thank you so much, Kendall. The bit.ly is case sensitive, or obviously it's there in the chat for you to click on. But both of these tools are in Google Doc form. So the only thing that we ask is if you're going to use them, that you make a copy first and then go ahead and plug and play into your school setting.
Gabe, one thing just for all of you joining, when you make that copy, especially for, as Google users, you'll have to move it to a different folder. Otherwise, it won't allow you to make a copy. Because if you make the copy in the folder, it's going to restrict you. So sometimes we're like, we don't have access. So when you make the copy, you just have to change the location of where that copy is going to go, which you would want to put into your own drive.
Yep, absolutely. So as we get into our first tool, as Garth said, we're exploring our Worst Best protocol. And this is one of our more popular tools that we use. And I think what makes it really popular is that we start with those low impact, or what we would call the worst attributes within PLCs. So as you're sitting down with your teams, what we're going to ask them is to start to define some of those low impact attributes, or some of the worst characteristics that you can think of within a PLC. And so just take a few seconds right now in our attendee chat, if you wouldn't mind, and list some of those things that you can think of that you have observed or seen within PLCs that you would consider those low impact characteristics or worst attributes within a PLC.
And the cool thing about this is just a chance to get some of those. Often, I don't know about you, Gabe, but I find when I'm working with teams on this, like some frustrations, some things where we tend to see it happen, but we don't know what to do. And this is one of the best ways to be able to at least confront it, is to get it out there. So as Gabe mentioned, we think about, like, if Gabe or I were walk into a low functioning, low impact PLC meeting, like, what are the things that we would actually see in there? And that's where we'd love you to put that in the attendee chat. Just start to list, what are the things that would be observed that we would say are very low impact characteristics of within a PLC meeting? Okay, yeah, see that blame game. Gabe, I'm seeing apathy, inability to address the adult behavior, people off task.
Yeah. They don't have a clear method of making decisions. That's an important one that comes up time and time again. Lack of focus or lack of vision.
Just a lot of the complain game. So again, we kind of saw that a little bit earlier when we think about the rant. Okay, now they're coming in very fast here. Everyone has their own agenda. Oh, this one, thank you so much. The individual that put, one person talking over everyone else. So it's kind of like it's really a PLC of one. The rest are just in the room, with that person. And not collaborating around the resources. No one knows the
truest.
deliverables. Thank you so much for sharing that one. Like, what is the actual deliverable as a result? So Gabe, as we kind of look at these, I think what we have here in terms of our example also is going to align here very well. Heated arguments, focusing on things that you can't change outside of our control, one person talking the whole time. A lot of these that we created, this was actually from a meeting that Gabe ran with a school, that the example that you see here, venting the whole time, very much in alignment around some of what we're seeing. So Gabe, what do we do then about that when we know, like, and the reason why we start this is there's been a lot of studies down around, if we want to change how people behave or the actions, start with what we don't want to see. But what do we do then once we have these low impact characteristics?
Absolutely. So as Garth said, it sounds a little strange to start with the worst or even start a tool with some of those negative attributes around PLCs. But what we're going to do now is use a process we call creative inversion, or in the world of Jerry Seinfeld, when George was having a little bit of a tough day, Jerry told him, well, if every instinct you have is wrong, then the opposite would have to be right. And so we're going to use that process of creative inversion to really take those negatives and give our team an opportunity to vent and talk about the things that don't work, but then of course come back to the things that we want to work. So using that creative inversion process to take that list of all of those low impact strategies and really go one for one, and now with our team try to envision some of those high impact strategies. And the other thing that we do, as Garth moves down to that next slide, is really try to structure what that impact should look like. So when we're talking about some of those negative attributes, they might be pretty simple, like one voice is taking over the conversation, or we don't have an agenda. But now as we move into those high impact strategies, we're going to ask teams to be a little more specific and descriptive as we start to list some of those things that have high impact. So in other words, if we don't have an agenda, a very simple opposite of that would be we just have an agenda, but we all know an agenda isn't going to fix our PLCs. Our agendas would have to be time bound. They would have to be have action steps. They would have to be relevant to our learning as an adult group. And so we'd want it to be a little more specific as we move into some of those best. And if you wouldn't mind just going back to the attendee chat one more time and thinking about some of those best attributes that we might see that really promote collaboration and student impact.
So again, just in the attendee, and the way that I love it that Gabe phrases is just take everything you just put on the low impact and just reverse it. Just reverse it and say, okay, so what does it actually look like now if those characteristics were opposite? And now we begin to list those out. So again, if you can do that in the attendee chat, what would be like, if Gabe walked into a PLC meeting that was functioning at the absolute highest level, what would we actually see in there?
And they're starting to come in now, Garth. We're talking about clear roles and concern for our students and colleagues, being held accountable, putting first things first, pause for consideration, active listening, clear and concise agendas, supporting one another positively, having awareness, working together as a team. These are all the start of a great collaborative meeting.
That's fantastic. And just as these are coming in now, this is what you're creating. Like the group is creating the look-fors of what we want to see. That's the nice thing. This isn't coming from the, whether it's the PLC leader or it's the administration within the building. The really powerful outcome of using this particular planning tool is it's their voice. They're creating what they want it to look like in terms of what a really high impact PLC. And it allows us to, again, as said earlier, maybe expose a little bit of the toxicness that we sometimes see by really getting out, like just straight to, let's get to what it would actually look like. So as we show this example here, you can see, everyone working together to come up with solutions, having a meaningful agenda and sticking to it. Saw somebody put something in there about a meaningful agenda. Maybe revisiting the purpose for each meeting, and it's okay. Like even I was working with a school district in North Carolina not too long ago where they just said, though, sometimes we come to these meetings, we have a little bit of frustration built up. Great. So they just said, you know what, we're going to put a time limit on it, but all right, 5 minutes of frustration. Now let's get to what we really want to do, which is talk about practice and move on. So they put that in there. everyone open to new ideas, identifying our learning. So these are things that we want to aim for. But again, it's through their collective voice, which is incredibly powerful. So when we think about that now, and as we kind of go through and say, okay, great, we started with the worst. Now we have identified the characteristics of the best PLC meeting and what it would look like. The reality is you're going to have a lot of stuff on there that you might not be able to get 100% agreement on for all of them. So then we start to think about the commitments. What are the commitments that we are willing to make? And so the last part of this particular tool, and this is from my last year of coaching high school football. This was kind of our motto within our football team, which was, the idea of making the commitment. But the last part is prioritization. So you've gone through, you've identified the low impact characteristics, you've identified the high impact, which is what we want to aim for. And then as a group, we say, okay, what are 2 or 3 things that we can absolutely commit to every single meeting? We do not stray away from this. We make sure it's a part of everything that we do. And what we've noticed when schools and teams use this planning tool and they make those commitments, they stick with them. Because again, as mentioned before, it's grounded in their voice, their vision. And then they have a way to hold each other accountable to it. So if one of those, if I'm just looking at, looking at the attendee chat, is one of them, several people said that we have a solution that when we walk out of that room. Great, make that a commitment that we have solutions focused, that we have a solution to what we're going to do. Some have said in here that we want to know what's the next step, what's the deliverable on that. Great, we're going to commit to knowing what happens between now and the next meeting, and we're all going to make sure that we do that part. Using something like this leads to changes in adult behavior, which is, as we go back to some of the fires initially, that's a big piece of it is how do we begin to change the adult behavior? Gabe, when you think about this, what are, here's an example from schools that you've worked with. What did you notice the biggest change was with the teams as they started to use this particular planning tool?
Well, I think, but as you said, when you kicked off this tool, Garth, it's different because we've all been through norming activities before. And usually we haven't used the creative inversion process, but also we're going to ask teams, as you said, to not just go through the process of prioritizing and creating our collective commitments, but also we're going to ask them to live up to that. So I'm just going to go to the attendee chat, Garth, and Elisa Williams put on that we should see part of the meeting norms listed on our agenda. That's absolutely right. We should have a process for not just putting this on the wall, but if we've created a vision of how we're going to work together, we need to absolutely find a way to live that vision of how we're going to work together. And to me, when we've created a vision of that collaboration, whether it goes on the agenda or it's just something we live by, this is a working document. And so we can, you mentioned that cause-effect relationship and how important that is. We should be creating those if-then statements. In other words, if these bests are present, then this is what we're actually going to see in the classroom as a result of our collective efforts. And I don't think norming tools typically go that far, but I appreciate that we're looking into those action steps, and so are the attendees.
Perfect. Well, Gabe, one of the things I absolutely love about this particular tool as well is sometimes some of the best planning tools can serve multi-purposes. So for those of you that are joining right now, if you're watching after the fact, this particular tool isn't just for PLCs. It's a process that can be used to really kind of establish anything that you want to see happen within your building. So these are other scenarios that we've seen educators use this particular protocol for, whether it's a professional development day, worst best mini lesson. A lot of times like our Stagger Center, which does a lot around assessment and grading, they'll use this tool to talk about like the worst best assessment and what would a really great assessment look like, parent teacher conferences. And I will say that probably my favorite one that I've still seen schools use this, and more are using it right now, is for the worst best first day of school. And so the first time I saw one of our schools that we work with in Minnesota use this, like they said, what would the worst first day of school look like? It was an elementary school, but they said, what would the worst first day of school look like? And they're like, we're just, hitting the kids, over and over again with all of the rules. And it's just going from meeting to meeting versus like, how do we get them so excited? And they said, they answered this question when they saw the best, like, what would lead to a student going home from school the first day saying, that was the best first day of school ever? I mean, Gabe, they had red carpet and balloons and all this stuff. They're clapping for every single kid that walks in the building. It was incredible, all just because they took something like this, just some simple creative inversion, and said, let's talk about what we don't want it to look like, and now let's talk about what would it look like if this was happening at the highest level. So we show this because this is a very versatile tool for you to be able to use still, even whether that's at the building level or even in your PLCs as you're talking about any of the other things that are part of the ongoing discussion. So again, a very versatile tool that can be used. All right, Gabe, time is flying here. So here's another PLC fire that we want to talk about and give you another tool to be able to take on, which is, what can we talk about that actually makes an impact in our classrooms? We've all heard some of those ongoing challenges that we see about, great, we're coming, we're just supposed to bring data. We talk about data, but we never really talk about what's leading to the data or how we can change the data or how we can change the practice. And so for this particular fire, we want to spend a little bit of time talking about cause-effect relationship, and in particular, how that ties to the visible learning research by Professor John Hattie. And we're going to operate under the assumption that a lot of people on this call are familiar with the visible learning research. But if you're not, we highly encourage you to look it up. It's probably, in my opinion, my entire education career, and I've heard Gabe say the same thing, probably the single biggest impactful set of data points and research that I've ever seen, just because it really does focus on what makes the biggest impact in our schools. It comes from obviously not individual studies, but it's meta-analysis of multiple studies. But we're talking about 300+ million students that are a part of this. And year in and year out, Gabe, what continues to be the number one effect?
Collective teacher efficacy.
Collective teacher efficacy. So we hear this a lot, and even in the attendee chat today, we noticed that people were talking a little bit about, we would observe a high sense of efficacy or collective efficacy within our PLCs. But that's really tough to do. And I know the first time I saw this come out and look at, collective teacher efficacy as the number one thing that influences the outcomes or student learning in our buildings, I know myself, just like a lot of schools we work with, are like, okay, so what does that mean? And B, how do we begin to establish that efficacy? Well, our good friend Dr. Jenny Donahue, who runs the Collective Efficacy Center here at First Educational Resources, summarizes collective efficacy in a I would say simple but very powerful way. And she defines collective efficacy. It refers to teachers in a school characterized that by an attitude that together they can make a difference for students. Now, here's the downfall for this, Gabe, that I know is if we just take that at face value, that can be very challenging and probably lead to a lot of negativity. Because I know if I'm thinking about this as an educator, I'm like, wait a second, the number one thing that impacts student learning is the adult behaviors or the mindset of our adults. Well, Gabe, I don't know about you, but if I'd went into my staff when I was a principal, if you went in there and just said, hey, you all just need to have a little bit of a better mindset, I'm pretty sure the reaction would not be so positive. Gabe, what would how would your staff respond to that?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. We can't just walk into a staff meeting and say, we need to change our attitudes. All we need to do is believe that our students are going to do better, and they just will do better. And so I can't imagine the looks that we would get if we did walk in and do that. So as you said, it's a simple definition, Garth, but there's more complexities to teacher collective efficacy.
So what Jenny did, which has been very, very helpful to say, how do we take something as simple as this definition and begin to actually apply it in our schools? She did a lot of research on organizations, schools that have a high sense of efficacy. And through this research, it's been validated by Professor Hattie himself. She came up with 5 conditions that if these conditions are prevalent within a school, there is a much higher likelihood that there's going to be a stronger sense of efficacy. And those 5 conditions are teacher empowerment, embedded reflective practice, goal consensus, cohesive teacher knowledge, and supportive leadership. Now, we don't have time to go into all 5 of those today, but we are going to talk a little bit about the 2 that are highlighted right now on the screen, which is embedded reflective practice and cohesive teacher knowledge. Embedded reflective practice means that within our organizations, we create time and intentionality to reflect upon the practices that we engage in. That we actually, and this one, I know, Gabe, you hear this all the time, I hear this all the time. This is one that is always a struggle because they say, where do we find time to do it? We have to find time. Well, one way that we could find time to do it is within the PLC process, within our PLC meetings. The second one, cohesive teacher knowledge, refers to an understanding of shared understanding of the teaching practices that exist within our building and within our teams that lead to impact. So one, we have to create the opportunity to reflect around what we're doing. Two, we have to have a shared understanding of the practices that lead to impact. And as you know, as Professor Hattie even says, the most effective teachers and teams continuously evaluate the effect of their teaching on student learning and adjust accordingly. Well, great, that sounds amazing, but how do we actually do that? Well, the second tool that we're going to get to today is really going to speak to how do you actually get to a point where you are understanding that cohesive knowledge around practices, but also just have a process to use to evaluate the strategies that we're using. And so before Gabe walks you through this, I just want to talk a little bit around the mindset around this particular tool, which again is one of our absolute favorites when it comes to how we kind of work with schools around this process and begin to share practices. I think most people are probably familiar with this website and app called TripAdvisor. And I would say TripAdvisor was a game changer for the travel industry. And Gabe talks about this a lot. He travels a lot and works with schools. I go out and travel a lot, work with schools and meet with schools. And one of the things that sometimes happens when we are, maybe traveling into a new area, we're not as familiar with that area, there might be some hotels in that area that we want to check out. We go to sites like TripAdvisor so people understand, like, what is that experience that we see? So we have a question for you in the chat box. Hopefully you're all familiar with TripAdvisor, but why are sites like TripAdvisor successful? Like, why are review sites like that? Like, if you could, design the most informative TripAdvisor review, what would be essential? But just in there, like, why is something like TripAdvisor helpful for you as a consumer as you're thinking about travel? If you could just go ahead and put that in the chat box, we'd greatly appreciate it. Just talk through kind of what those are. Why are review sites like that helpful for you as a consumer? Okay, here we go. They're coming in now. Gabe, what are you seeing here?
We're seeing a one-stop shop, resources in one spot, easy to access. We value what other people who have actually experienced that trip or that, that place of business, feedback. It's helpful.
Perfect. So again, Gabe, let's hold on that. When we value what other people have experienced and want to learn from those. Oh, I think that is a great segue for this. So basically, this tool we're about to introduce you to is kind of like the TripAdvisor, but for PLCs around strategies. So again, kind of a scenario. This is very real for me right now because we've been working on trying to plan a vacation to Cancun here for a little while over the winter break. And one of the things that was really helpful as we were exploring different resorts down there is TripAdvisor. And here's what I can tell you. A review like this does not help, which I think is sometimes what we do in schools. Too often we'll get to, hey, talk about a strategy and be like, it didn't work, or we tried that once. Or we could have something like this, which gives us a lot more detail around, what's going on at the resort. So it's not just the 5-star rating, but it's what led to it. What are the actual things, the experiences that people had that led to that particular, feeling really good about staying there at that resort. So this particular tool is to move away from, we tried that once, and actually give you the same exact process. And instead of now talking about vacations and trips, we're talking about strategies that we're using in the classroom. So Gabe, you want to talk through this, this protocol called strategy review?
Absolutely. And as we dig into this tool, if you're watching this webinar and thinking, tools and protocols are not why I got into education, and this makes my skin crawl a little bit. I just want to address, I am with you, or I was anyway, when I was a principal. And one of the things that I learned about using tools and protocols, especially in PLCs, where as we talked about some of those fires, not everybody's getting along, the tools can actually take the brunt of some of that disagreement. And strategy review is a great example of that because it's very self-explanatory, but it's also a tool that allows us to share and get a sense of that collective efficacy by going step by step and following the process to talk about what actually works in the classroom and what brings impact in the classroom. So as you look through strategy review, you're going to see these are the things that we feel like teachers want to know if they're going to explore new strategies in the classroom. And why should we read every single book in the professional development library to find that out? Let's talk amongst ourselves, whether that be a team of teachers within a school or even a group or a cohort within a district. But we are going to ask teachers to provide a summary of what they did. Going back to that cause-effect relationship, what were we hoping to see when we put the strategy into place? And as we move down to the second page, what did we actually see? So what did we see from students, but not just our students? What were our educators doing in order for this strategy to happen at the highest level? And as we continue to move through our tool, we've really grasped the idea of TripAdvisor all the way down to the star rating to say, here are the things that we think are going to work. So in other words, the tips and tricks. We've been through this before. Here's a few things that you should do in order to help the strategy happen at the highest level, but also some of those pitfalls. It could be a strategy where we thought it could be a whole class could participate in this instructional strategy. But after putting the strategy into place, what we found was it really only works for groups of 10 to 15. These are things that we want to know so that we don't have to go through those same pitfalls as the group that's presenting on this strategy. And then, like I said before, we go all the way down to the star rating, because we feel like what teachers want to know is not just the impact of the strategy. Of course, that's important, but also we want to know about the ease of implementation. So a lot of times we use, as an example, we will use project-based learning. We know the research around project-based learning. For any of you that have been through project-based learning, you know that it can have a really big impact, but it also takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of planning, a lot of discussion to put into place. So while ease of implementation might be closer to 1 star, overall impact might be closer to 5. So if we're taking on a new curriculum resource or something like that, this year might not be the year for project-based learning, but we can quickly, at a glance, look at strategy review. Within a few minutes, we can decide if this is a strategy that our team might want to take on. It also provides that accountability and collective teacher efficacy that we're talking about, because now we know the impact that's happening throughout our school or our district.
So one of the things as you're looking at this, obviously, whatever the strategy is that you review, this is just a way to kind of guide that conversation. We want to get you in the mindset of, in a PLC meeting, to not just talk about the data. We're going to get to, you need to also have the access to the data. We're going to talk about that in just a second. But just to have a process to say, all right, here's something that we implemented in the classroom. Here's what we did. Here's what we noticed in our students. Here's what we noticed in our educators. But ultimately, as Gabe said, what was the overall impact? Because if it's making a positive impact, if it's getting the impact we're aiming for, great, that's a strategy we want to continue to use. But if it's not leading to the impact, I know we've tried a lot of things that just didn't work the way we wanted to, great, well, we need to maybe remove that from kind of what we're going to be using in the future and continue to focus on the things that matter the most and lead to the impact. So this is kind of a shortened version. When Gabe works with schools, he goes through a little bit more of a detailed version on this, but this is really meant to drive that dialogue, because at the end of the day, we really want to get you the point where you're able to understand the impact. It's less about what we did. It's more about the impact of what we did and why we think that happened. That's the conversations that we want to see you have in your teams. And as Jenny mentioned, collective efficacy is strengthened when teams see the results of their combined efforts. They'll do so by engaging in this process, the observable impact process. It's kind of that next iteration needed for sustainable school improvement. And again, this is where we're referring to cause-effect relationship. The more we can identify what we're doing and the impact it leads to, the more that's going to strengthen our efficacy. Now, we could sit and talk about this all day. I know Gabe wishes we could take you through a few more tools, but these are at least 2 starting points for you that you can take and use. But if there's anything, if your PLCs are struggling, if you're looking for recalibration, if you're looking for a thought partner around how to really kind of revitalize and move just from kind of action of we're just kind of going through the same thing over and over again, please reach out to Gabe, who is the director there. This is his contact information. We'll make sure that is shared out with you as well. But the last thing before we turn it over to Kendall is we also have a bunch of free resources around this on our website. So again, if you just either go to our website, firsteducation-us.com, or if you use this bit.ly link that's here, these slides will be made available for you after today as well. Please go to the free resources tab. There's a lot of other resources that can help you in your PLCs. So that being said, Kendall, the one thing I just want to make sure that people understand that part of our process also involves PLC data review to be able to access data. And one of the common challenges we always come up against is how do we actually get the data? What's a good system out there for that data collection so we can maximize collection, but also maximize how to have these conversations? So we're going to turn it back to you to kind of share a little bit more about Otus and how that's a really great data collection tool to drive some of the conversations Gabe and I talked about today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I loved the TripAdvisor analogy. 5 stars for the detailed explanation of those toolkit resources. I think those are great. And I'm excited for folks to be able to check those out. To our audience, wow, thank you so much for the engagement. You all kept me so busy on the back end here, just reading through all the different comments. We appreciate you for showing up and asking thoughtful questions. We are going to tackle a few questions live with our friends Gabe and Garth. But before we do that, I just want to take a quick moment to build on what was shared and spotlight how Otus is a tool that can support the work of PLCs, as Garth was just alluding to there. What we do at Otus is we bring every single data point, we're talking about data, into one place, whether that's assessments taken outside of Otus, like map growth or iReady, assessments created in Otus, like your common formative assessments. I know when I was in PLCs, those were a huge driver of data, or even from popular companies that you may already be using, curriculum programs like Bridges in Mathematics or Amplify. All that data lives in Otus alongside tools, interactive graphs, and visuals that help you to see where students are now and where they need to go, which is such an important part of the work that PLCs do once they are focused on those common goals. If your PLC is currently meeting and typing into spreadsheets during that very short, valuable time you have together, there is a better way. Instead, with Otus, you can pull up a recent formative or summative assessment, maybe compare it to other measures, or just dig in and really use the data to spot patterns and regroup students so you can help them meet those grade level expectations. We also have an AI tool that makes this work even faster. For example, you can ask AI to create small groups for your reteaching or extension, and then ask for suggestions on what to cover in each group. Something I personally spent about hours with different Post-its all over my desk that was a true disaster, can really be simplified through the right kind of technology that supports the work you're already doing. I think it's so important when schools evaluate tools is that you're not adopting a tool just to make that a new initiative or goal. It needs to fit with the goals of your PLCs or whatever your goal is and align to what you're looking to do. And that's really how Otus supports PLCs. Because all this data analysis and tracking of student needs happens in the same platform, everyone has that visibility into progress, and we can all collaboratively work together to help students grow, which ultimately I'm sure is the goal of your PLC. We would love to show you more. We are at otus.com. I know this was just a very quick little commercial to tell you about Otus, but while I have you, before we go off to Q&A here, I did want to just drop in the chat an invite to our next webinar if you want to keep the free learning with our friends from First Education up. We're doing an event later this month in September. This one, we're shifting the focus to explore how you can rethink student accountability through standards-based grading. There's a lot to unpack in that sentence I said there, but we're not going to do that here. We're going to do that at that other webinar. So join us to learn more about kind of removing behaviors from grades, different angles there, and we will have our friends from First Education there. So with that, thank you for listening to a little bit more about Otus. Check out our website to learn more. And I will say the resource list that we put together for you all, when you leave, if you just refresh the page, it will pop up. I know I mentioned there was a technical glitch. It's there, but I didn't want to have you refresh during the actual webinar and miss anything since all the content was so
and
good.
We'll make sure that the images of the slides are available for everyone too, because I saw in there that some people are looking for the examples and stuff like that. So we'll make sure this whole slide deck is uploaded to that.
Thank you. Thank you. And we'll share the audience questions with you all too. So if we don't get to your questions today, just know we have those and we will work through that as best as we are able. Gabe and Garth, I don't know how you want to tackle questions, but I did find a good one. You want me to just kind of toss it to you two and you can decide who wants to answer it?
I already know Gabe is looking forward to answering it, Kendall.
All right, Gabe, you are up. This is an interesting one. I saw this coming through the chat, but somebody with us today said that they're from Texas. And in Texas, teachers have limited time to meet. It's exactly 45 minutes. They mentioned that in their previous state, they had the option to have a late start on a particular day that would give them an hour and a half before students arrived. The question, though, and maybe folks here, this might resonate with them, time, we never have enough time, is how do you suggest schools fare with limited focus time to really discuss all of the work we talked about today? Just any suggestions there for how to navigate that barrier that often is out of their control?
Gabe, this is right in your alley because you work with a lot of schools that run up against this challenge.
Absolutely. This challenge is definitely not isolated to Texas or anywhere else in the country. We see this all the time. And thanks so much for the question, Kendall. I think, I've actually worked with schools who have been so limited with time that their PLC, their given time and all they had to work with was around 30 minutes. And of course, we're coming from different classrooms or dismissals. And so that 30 minutes could actually be less than that. And so we really had to work, as we talked earlier, about having that concrete agenda, spending time creating our vision of what we wanted to accomplish within that PLC. And we might not get to all the things that an hour-long PLC can get to, but we still have the ability to talk about data. We still have the ability to talk about instructional strategies that work. And it might not be in every single meeting, but if we divide that up and have an agenda that allows us to co-create that vision of what we want to see or those deliverables and those observables, then even in a 30-minute PLC or a 20-minute PLC, we can have what we talked about earlier in that observable impact in the classroom from our collaborative efforts in our PLCs.
And I do think, just to add to that, I think that's why the importance of those commitments as you're working through the worst best protocol are so important, because the commitment has to be to staying within this. We have such limited time that the moment we start to break away from what our real focus is during that meeting, that leads to frustration, that leads to not having outcomes as a result or impact as a result. So that's why even more so, I'd say using a tool like the worst best protocol is going to be important, especially when time is so limited.
Yeah, rely on those tools and those action steps. Absolutely.
Thank you. That was so helpful. I know we are short on time here. I do have one question. It's a little bit of a leading question to just kind of learn more about how you work with schools. I pulled at least 10 different ways of folks kind of saying the same thing. And it's really around challenging adult behavior. Someone called it negative. Someone said like their team is prone to conflict. Teachers nitpick, and it can be challenging to address those types of adult behaviors. I guess I'm curious, in your work with schools, do you have like a diagnostic process for kind of personalizing the PLC supports to maybe address some of those challenges that are not so much around the systems, but around like personalities and conflict? It seems like a lot of folks are just struggling with the dynamics of their PLCs. And I certainly think that could be a whole nother webinar, but I'm curious if you have like a high level overview of what you might do for a school who maybe has some data, has some processes, but it's more of a behavioral conflict between the team.
Yeah, it's another good question, and it's a question that comes up in just about every PLC at some point in time. Even the most high-functioning PLCs are going to have conflict at some point. And I go back to, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, Kendall, but I go back to what we've been talking about and really relying on the tools. If you spend time within the tools and protocols and answering those questions, you tend to be more focused on the students than you are on each other. And I think that's a good thing within some of those PLCs that have some of that infighting or just struggling to get along or a difference of opinion. Garth and I will always say it's tough to run away from what's good for kids. And so if we're focusing on the data, if we're focusing on strategies that work, if we're using the tools and protocols and we're answering those questions that we know lead to impact, then we don't really have time to disagree, because that the data is the data. It doesn't lie. And so if we're using reliable data and we're using our tools and protocols, again, it's tough to have some of those disagreements, because the tools lead us through those really important guiding questions that we feel like lead to improved student outcomes.
I think one other way to also add to that, Kendall, is, as they're going through and creating, here's kind of the worst best, another layer that will often work with schools is, what is our process when the norms are broken? What are if we can spell that out? Because again, the more we can be as concrete as possible with everyone in the room, now it's less that Gabe thinks that I'm doing this wrong, or Kendall, no, we've established as a part of our vision for the PLCs, this is what it looks like, and this is what happens if the protocol is not adhered to. And I'll add another layer, because Gabe and I are both former school administrators. Now there has to then be some accountability that's tied to that. I think where it gets a little bit tricky is when we don't have that clearly spelled out, and then we're trying to hold someone accountable to some actions that we haven't established in the first place. That's where it becomes a little bit more easy for those pathways to start to go in various directions versus, great, here's what we're committed to. This is what it looks like for an effective PLC. Here's what's going to happen if these norms are broken. And great, then we can't rely on the teachers to have to, there's an element of accountability there from the team, but then there also has to be another layer of, okay, we said this is what the result is. How do we make sure then we move forward that way? So that's where I would really say it becomes more of a systematic approach to it versus people trying to isolate, address those scenarios just in isolation.
And just one more add-on to that, Kendall, as Garth was talking through those roles and responsibilities, we spend a lot of time with districts defining those roles and responsibilities. So in other words, when conflict is predictable, we know it's going to happen. How do we deal with conflict within our own team? Well, we've got a tool and a protocol for that within Worst Best. But what if it goes to another level? What if we need our administrators to step into that role? Because as people were saying within the chat, we don't always feel comfortable doing that. And so what are we'll just call them the support staff, administrators, coaches, those types of PLC support staff that maybe aren't part of the instructional team, as in the classroom, but they're there to support PLCs. What's their role in that? And if we define those roles, we tend to be able to collaborate at a higher level and get rid of some of that dysfunction, because we've clearly defined those roles for everybody that's involved in the PLC.
Thank you so much for elaborating on that. You two are truly a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And I just appreciate everyone for hanging on with us. I know we went over a few minutes, but I love seeing that hardly anyone hopped off. So thank you for staying extra here just to continue learning and listening to this great advice. As we mentioned, the recording will be available. The resource list is there. If you refresh, you should be able to see that. And fun fact, I learned that the slides are there too. So we don't even need to send you those. They'll already be in the portal, which is great. Everything should be in there for you. But just thank you so much, everyone, for spending this 1 hour with us to tackle PLC challenges and really get some new strategies to bring back to your team. That concludes the webinar for today. You can learn more about how Otus supports PLCs through tools and data at otus.com. We are otus.com. And thank you so much, Gabe and Garth. You two are truly just a pleasure to work with. So we appreciate you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yep, and same to you. We really appreciate the partnership, Kendall. Thanks so much.